GM.
GM.
So Kinjal, Blockchain Capital, congrats on the new raise, new announcement.
Thank you.
Can you tell us a bit about the structure of the funds and their focus?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, everyone. My name is Kinjal. Excited to be here. So earlier this week, we announced our 6th early stage fund and our first opportunity fund, which we're really excited about. The focus is going to be continue to be across the entire ecosystem. So we continue to invest across infrastructure, DeFi, consumer, gaming, really a broad mandate. And we'll be focused on both early stage and later stage opportunities with a venture focus. So everything we invest in is with that in mind and really a long-term orientation.
So it's super interesting because some things are the same and some things are different with these funds. The big difference being this is your first go at later stage, right? Is that sort of an indication or a commitment that crypto, the industry is maturing, that you see opportunities as opposed to later?
Yeah, I think we're really excited about the projects and protocols, companies that have been funded over the past few years, as well as a lot of the portfolio companies that are already in our existing portfolio that will continue to mature. And so we're looking forward to investing at the later stage. I think there's a lot of opportunity to come, and we just sort of are starting to see the beginning of that. And so that was really driving our decision to create 2 separate funds to be able to have each one with a focused mandate on stage.
Would you get a little more nuanced? Do you think in the different sectors, some are going to be more early stage focused and some late stage focused?
Yeah, I think part of this is just going to follow the natural trajectory of what we've seen. So if we think about the last decade of investing in crypto, there's been a lot of infrastructure, there's been a lot of DeFi over the past few years. And so I would imagine some of those companies and protocols will be sort of graduating or maturing to the later stage, as opposed to consumer, for example, which is much earlier, really just developed over the past few years as a sort of investable category. And so I would imagine those will be more early stage opportunities.
And your background is much more in consumer, right?
Correct.
Can you give us your overview, your landscape of consumer sector in crypto today?
Yeah, absolutely. So a few years ago, when I originally started investing, consumer wasn't really a category in crypto. I think there were some early sort of inklings around gaming, but it wasn't fully fledged. I think the past decade has been focused on how do we onboard new users, whether that's through centralized exchanges or custodians, and then how do we scale, right? How do we actually get blockchains to work for potentially millions of users or billions? I think over the past few years, we're now starting to see this more feasible for consumer apps in gaming and social, and even DeFi, I would say, in many cases have consumer products that have done quite well. I tend to think about investing in consumer and crypto as looking for opportunities for new behaviors to emerge, or really leveraging coordination and decentralized networks in a unique way so that crypto is needed, or crypto really adds something to the user's experience. And so I think we're sort of at the beginning of stages of this, but that's really what I look for when thinking about consumer, and there's a few categories that I think are interesting.
Can you give an example of that theory where that works?
For sure. I think on-chain games is a category that wasn't quite feasible until we started to see blockchain scale. And I think on-chain games will use blockchains as the source of truth, not just for assets, but really for any interaction that happens on-chain. And I think that has implications for certain types of games, whether it's like a strategy game or types of games that really leverage coordination across players. And so I think that's one example where I think the introduction of crypto and having assets be on-chain really enhances the experience for users. And so that's one category, for example, that we're excited about and spending more time on.
So gaming has been very popular, and I'm curious, as an infrastructure-focused fund, how do you think about investing in infrastructure in gaming specifically?
Yeah, I think within each sort of vertical of this industry, there's still a lot of specific infrastructure to build. So within gaming, there's how do we make it easier for developers to build new games? How do we ensure that games can scale if they, if they do acquire millions of users? And so for gaming, one example would be, who's going to build sort of the game engine or like the game developer toolkit to enable, hundreds of games to sort of proliferate. I think that's still an unanswered question. There have been some really great teams working on this, but it's still something that I think has a lot of room to grow.
Awesome. Can you answer that for another sector also? How do you think about infrastructure either in DeFi or other consumer places?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think with DeFi, we saw sort of the first wave of what you could call infrastructure with decentralized exchanges and lending protocols, and really we're spending time thinking about new primitives that developers can then come and build apps on top of. And I think that's sort of a trend across the entire DeFi space, is sort of enhancing for the end user being the developer. And so we look at market structure basically across all of DeFi.
So this is I think it's a super interesting shift, and in DeFi, we've certainly seen this, where a lot of the apps that were going after consumers originally are now having what actually Dustin, who's just before us, is called the platform moment. You have Uniswap going to V4, Synthetics with V3 and others. Do we have examples of where, maybe it's on the network level, but where protocols and apps try to attract developers as their users as opposed to consumers or end users?
I think it's starting out that way. Even if I were to look at some of the protocols on the consumer side, if you look at Lens as an example, Lens is really setting itself up to attract developers so that they can build apps that attract users on top of Lens protocol. I think that's one example on the consumer side where we are still seeing sort of the go-to-market strategy be focused on developers. And I think it's going to continue in social because there's so many different variations of what apps could look like, and it's still relatively early days.
All right, before we move on from gaming, I have to ask, are you a Friend Tech bull? What's your take on it?
I'm really excited about what Friend Tech's doing. I think there's I have two sort of sides in my head. I've got like the angel and the devil, right? On one side, I see this is creating smaller community experiences where you can talk to a group of people that are, coalescing around a particular individual or an idea or whatever it may be. And I think that's what crypto is really good at, is like coordination. And I think they've made some really smart choices around UX and how to actually bring users on board. And then I think the other side is really around where I think there are open questions is around financialization of effectively people, right, on Twitter personas or your friends or whatever it may be, and whether that is sort of inherent behavior that we're looking for in social experiences. I think we've seen a wave of social tokens and sort of like the BitClout and similar projects in the past kind of go down this path, and it hasn't always, I think, panned out, and I think there's still some open questions around how that scales, how that dynamic scales. There's
a ton of experimenting in social. Is there a direction that you really like, or are there things that you wish you would see more?
So when I think about social, I'm thinking about it in the context of traditional social, Web 2. So this year was a really big year with Twitter moving to X, and Reddit had API upheaval, and Threads launched. So it feels like for the first time in a while, there's a lot of movement happening in social, and I really want to see UI or just like a user experience that kind of holds its ground among the existing apps that we have today and that we use today. And I think that's obviously a challenge, but I do think crypto can add to that experience. What I'm really excited about, I think, is bringing back the sort of localized community days of the internet. Right now, it feels like every social platform has sort of converged on becoming an ad network effectively. And I think bringing back sort of small groups and community-oriented conversation is going to be something that users really want and are excited by, and crypto can sort of bring that about.
That's interesting. So, I mean, I agree. Ads is the primary business of social today in Web 2, and it seems like monetizing creators is the primary business of social in Web 3. And you're pitching a different kind of path, which is more like smaller niche communities, as opposed to Well, the one thing you said is you want to see them compete with Web 2 social. Would you be more inclined to invest in a builder who's trying to compete with Web 2 social, or who is pitching a new primitive or framework in Web 3 social?
Yeah, I guess when I say compete with Web 2 social, I mean in the sense of it should be a fun app to use. It should be easy to use. It should be, you can get onboarded quickly. I think FriendTech, for example, hit a lot of those boxes in terms of just getting users on. And that's just from like a mind space. I think there's an expectation that's been set by social today. But I definitely think new primitives or new sort of ways to engage is what I'm looking for when talking to crypto companies.
Okay, so shifting gears a bit to blockchain capital. Our space is super young, both builders, investors, researchers, and we have a ton of uncertainty, especially on the regulatory landscape. I think the primary solution for this has been to decentralize, i.e. release a token, create a DAO, which hasn't really been a successful experiment broadly. How do you guys provide resources, guide, and help your entrepreneurs, especially in this extremely uncertain political environment?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I think these are the sort of market environments where we want to double down on leaning in with the portfolio. So this year we actually formalized our portfolio support into a program called Build. And we focus on a few things, but first and foremost is go-to-market and how to be very specific within the crypto market. So that could mean sort of token design and strategy and how you actually launch, or it could mean how your product sort of goes to market and your sales strategy. And then I think engineering and regulatory are the other two big buckets that we spend time on. In terms of regulatory, there's no sort of one-size-fits-all solution. I think every portfolio company has different considerations, and so what we try to provide is a view on the entire industry, just having a lot of different conversations and then synthesizing insights, patterns, data points that we can then bring back to founders to help them, perhaps see and understand things that they might not be engaging in on a day-to-day basis.
I know Josh and your team does a lot of work on the policy side, so.
Joshua will be here speaking tomorrow, so definitely check that
out. One or two more. Can you take us inside the walls of the venture capital firm and the changing thesis, if it has, about exits in crypto startups, in that traditionally it was about launch a token, and has the thesis shifted from you don't really need to launch a token, you can build a business and a public good and a business on top of that? Or are we still thinking like having a value accruing asset is the primary way to build these businesses?
I think that there's room for both. I certainly think decentralized networks with a token used to sort of govern that network is going to continue to be a model that we'll see. I think it's an important primitive that crypto has established, and I think it's going to continue. I also do think there's a world where we'll continue to see what we've seen with Uniswap, for example, where the protocol exists, and then there's a team that's building products, and it's a traditional sort of equity-based company, and that's growing in popularity. And then I do still think that a traditional IPO exit is still very much part of the conversation in crypto, and I think we're going to continue to see that be a path that folks are trying to go down.
I'm still optimistic the DAO experiment will figure it out. It hasn't yet, but I think it will.
Absolutely.
All right, well, thank you very much. Let's wrap up. How can people reach out to you, get in touch with you, and maybe give some guidance on who you'd like to hear from and what's the best way to pitch you?
Yeah, I mean, if you're building something in this industry, we'd love to chat with you. You can reach me on Twitter. I'm _Kinjal Shah. And then I think just in terms of what we're looking for when we're chatting with founders is really why crypto is the right solution, why we think crypto sort of enhances the experience or solves a problem, and then how you're uniquely able to build it, I think is really what we're looking to answer.
Kinjal, thanks very much.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
Go Bows.